2010 was a big year for DreamWorks Animation, as it was the first year in which they released more than 2 movies a year. They put out 3 movies that year, in fact. The first one was How to Train Your Dragon, which was a big success both critically and financially, and would go on to spawn a franchise of its own. The second was Shrek Forever After, which was originally the conclusion of the mainline Shrek movie series until the success of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish helped pave the way for DreamWorks to announce Shrek 5. And the last one is a simple original movie where DreamWorks asked the big question: what if the villain defeated the hero? This is just one original superhero movie about a big-headed villain that we all know as Megamind. Now, back in 2010, Megamind was a rather simple movie. It was met with good reviews from critics and was a solid box office success, but it wasn't until years later that it got brought back to life when it became a cult favorite among the internet through a ton of memes, which really helped it to make its mark in the DreamWorks animation catalog close to the leagues of Shrek, Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, and Trolls in an attempt to become their next big franchise. And what was the result? Nothing but a terrible and pathetic excuse to cash in on its cult following and exploit people's nostalgia for the original by following it up with a sequel and TV series, both having poor taste and low quality, only pandering to the lowest common denominator of the modern world, and both of which completely failed to be a good expansion of the Megamind universe or live up to the original, which proves that this franchise shouldn't even be a franchise, as Universal still keeps trying to milk the soul out of the older franchises that they own, and now the Megamind Rule series thankfully ended after only one season due to absolute bombing and being universally panned, which might cause Universal to leave Megamind alone once and for all. But before all that, it was just one simple and humble movie. A superhero story about a blue villain trying to create a new hero after defeating his old nemesis. So over 15 years after DreamWorks put out their take on a superhero movie, how well does it hold up all these years later? Did Megamind reach heroic fame for the studio? Or should it be shot with a dehydration gun like its horrendous follow-ups?
Shoot them with a dehydration gun!
Let's go!
In the big metropolis of Metro City, 2 figures who were shot through space just as their home planets were destroyed became 2 nemeses. One became Metro Man, superhero and the city's defender, and the other became
Megamind, incredibly handsome criminal genius and master of all villainy.
But one special day, Megamind succeeds in defeating Metro Man after kidnapping news reporter Roxanne Ritchie and takes over the city as their new overlord with his assistant Minion. But Megamind soon gets bored and misses having a nemesis to fight against after defeating Metro Man, so he decides to create a new hero for Metro City by disguising himself and Minion, taking Roxanne's nerdy cameraman Hal Stewart, and injecting Metro Man's powers into him. At the same time, he tries to win Roxanne's heart after disguising himself as Bernard, the museum curator. The rest of what happens is something you'll have to see for yourself. Now, before I do the rest of my analysis of the story, we all know the common plotline of superhero media. The superhero has an arch-nemesis who often kidnaps the damsel in distress, the hero defeats the villain and gets the girl, and everyone is saved until the villain does his next scheme, rinse and repeat. It's a generic trope that's been done to death so many times, and it has gotten pretty tiresome for the most part. In fact, many shows and movies of the same genre, even animated superhero media, have done things a bit differently rather than just sticking to that exact trope. But for this movie, DreamWorks had one thought in mind when coming up with this. What if the villain is the one who defeats the hero and gets control of whatever he wants, and what will they do next? This is basically what Megamind is, and they executed this story really well. On one hand, there have been people making comparisons between this movie and Despicable Me, which is also a computer-animated film released in 2010 starring a supervillain as its protagonist, and I do see some of the comparisons too. But on the other hand, I feel like this is more comparable to Richard Donner's Superman. I could tell that Tom McGrath and the other people working on this were really doing some research on that film and decided to do their own spin on it. Some good points include both Megamind and Metro Man having a similar origin story to Superman, Roxanne being a reporter like Lois Lane, a Marlon Brando-like impersonation for one of the characters as he takes inspiration from Brando's role as Jor-El, and the story itself is a unique twist on the plot of that particular Superman movie, and it works really well. It also plays a big role in the comedy, where a majority of the humor can give a lot of laughs with how zany it can get, and how often it satirizes the common generic superhero movie cliches. I really had a great time with all of that. I should also add that there's a very good reason that some moments in the movie ended up becoming some of the movie's most iconic memes. I also really enjoyed the bond between Megamind and Minion, as well as the subplot of Megamind and Roxanne and how it builds up their chemistry, as Megamind gains plenty of character development throughout the film's runtime. However, if I do have one thing to criticize about the story, it would have to be that there are some minor pacing issues. For example, at least one scene in the movie felt like it went on for a little too long. Then again, those are only minor nitpicks that don't take away from how great the writing is. Even with those pacing issues, the story is successful in taking the generic plotline found in other superhero media and putting a great spin on it while also delivering a lot of laughs, and that's what makes it an example of smart storytelling.
And action.
Since this movie is a satire of the superhero genre, the characters in this one are typically what I expect in several other superhero media, and yet they're still lovable with what they're poking fun at. Their comedy is really well pulled, their personalities are memorable, they're very well developed, and even their voice acting, while mostly done by celebrity actors as DreamWorks usually displays, does a good job at showcasing their talents. Let's start with our main protagonist, Megamind himself, voiced by Will Ferrell. This guy is obviously based on other supervillains like Lex Luthor, but we also get to see his life outside of terrorizing the city, showcasing the ups and downs of being a villain that can also apply to the real world we live in. I also gotta say that Will Ferrell really fits the character well in the same way that Robin Williams did for the Genie. Even if he is voiced by a major Hollywood celebrity, Ferrell manages to capture Megamind's genius, wit, and Doofenshmirtz-style moments, and you'd even be surprised that this is Will Ferrell. This level has also been carried over to actual animated antagonists voiced by him like Lord Business in the Lego Movie. Next is Metro Man, voiced by Brad Pitt. He obviously represents Superman, but he also has a distinctive personality from Superman, and Pitt does a good job bringing the longtime savior of Metro City to life. Roxanne Ritchie, voiced by Tina Fey, like I said before, is definitely based on Lois Lane, and she may be the love interest, but she still has some good chemistry with Megamind, and Tina's performance is top-notch. And Minion, voiced by David Cross, is the comedic sidekick to Megamind who really steals the show for me. Like, every time I see him on screen, he always delivers the greatest laughs and moments in the film, and David Cross's performance helps too. And then we have Hal Stewart, the nerdy guy who is Roxanne's cameraman. I will say he is a really funny and well-written character, but the only minor flaw I have with him is his performance by Jonah Hill. Not to say he's bad in this, he still did a great job as him. In addition, I regret what I said about Matty Carteropoulos' performance in the last film I reviewed, as I have seen some good acting roles from him too, like in Stranger Things. That SpongeBob movie still sucked though. But back onto the actual subject, every time I hear Jonah Hill's voice as Hal, it feels a bit more like Jonah Hill playing himself. In fact, Hal was even modeled after Jonah Hill as well, and that feels slightly distracting from his character for me. As for how he progresses in the movie, this is why I said the rest of what happens in the story is something you'll have to see for yourself. This is going to be a bit of a spoiler warning to those who haven't seen the movie yet, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I suggest you go to this timestamp right here and then go watch the movie for yourself. However, if you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen the movie, let's continue. Hal is the guy who Megamind and Minion identify in order to turn him into a new hero for Metro City, while also disguising themselves as his space parents. He then receives the name of Titan, the hero that Megamind had in, funny enough, his mind, and later at night gets upset in the background that Roxanne is dating Bernard, who is actually Megamind in disguise instead of him, following some dangerous rescue stunts that ensue. This causes him to go insane and start a crime spree behind Megamind's back, and the only way for the latter to convince Titan to fight him is to reveal to him that he was in disguise the whole time as both his space dad and the guy who dated Roxanne last night, until he soon learns the full true colors of Titan, the villain he actually got instead of a hero, that he wants to kill Megamind rather than send him to jail, and put Metro City, in his words,
under new management.
In addition to being a great character, Hal, or Titan, is also a great villain, as he isn't exactly a bad person all around. He's just someone who shouldn't have gotten the powers and responsibilities that come with being a superhero. He sees being Titan, the hero, as an opportunity to actually succeed at something he's wanted to achieve in his life and even impress Roxanne, but neither of them go well, and that's when Titan, the villain, starts to use his powers for his selfish gain instead of for the greater good or fighting evil. All of these things make Hal even better as a villain than as a character in himself, because this is a guy that I love to hate. With great humor, lots of development, and stellar voice acting, it goes to show that just like the movie itself, these characters have a brilliant mind of their own. I won't really say it's exactly on par with How to Train Your Dragon visually, but the animation itself is still pretty close, and it surprisingly still holds up more than 15 years later. It has some good character designs, such as Megamind with his big head and blue skin, Minion being a piranha fish in a dome connected to a robotic gorilla suit, and Metro Man as this bold superhero modeled after Elvis Presley. A lot of the designs in the movie are great, even if Hal looks a little too much like Jonah Hill. And the character animation is a great example of how DreamWorks really knows how to bring their characters to life, including how expressive they get with their emotions. There are also stunning visual effects throughout, such as explosions, fire, lasers, smoke, water, ash, money floating, glowing, etc. And some scenes would have looked great in 3D since it was released in theaters back when digital 3D really dominated the big screen. It's just that I didn't get to watch it for the first time until I found it on Netflix many years ago. I should also admit that many of the gadgets that Megamind has are quite cool and inventive, including his dehydration gun, his infuser ray, his invisible car, and his brain box, showing off their capabilities in a way that's really impressive. And although the setting of Metro City itself does seem like your typical metropolis found in other superhero movies, it still shows how fun it is to explore the city and its landmarks, including the museum. And that leads into one of my favorite aspects of both the movie and the visuals, the action and battle scenes, which are highly immersive. You would think that this would just be another superhero movie where it's mostly a bunch of flying around buildings and engaging in fights, but the way the movie presents it, it's more than just that. When the film has some action going on, it can get very intense, and only DreamWorks can pull something off as great as that. Another highlight is that one scene where it was raining, which is well executed and really beautiful to look at. It really stood out to me as Roxanne is feeling some emotions that night. It's been more than 15 years, and no matter how many times you see this movie, there's a chance that the animation will still hold up and look just about as awesome as it did back in 2010. There's a very good reason Megamind has evolved into a cult favorite since its release. It is a highly enjoyable animated spoof of the superhero genre that contains a cleverly written story that does a splendid job poking fun at the generic superhero tropes, great animation that surprisingly holds up years later, a whole cast of memorable characters with unique personalities, and not to mention a soundtrack with an incredible use of licensed songs that fit really well with the scenes that the filmmakers were going for. It might not be 100% perfect, as it does have a few minor issues, but it still manages to be the most unique animated superhero movie since The Incredibles. If you're a DreamWorks fan or a fan of superhero movies, this is a high recommendation for you. But I'd say that even superhero movie non-fans may get some enjoyment out of this. Even if you aren't too big on franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the DC films, I can guarantee you'll have a fun time with Megamind, because it truly deserves its cult status. Maybe not so much that it deserves a feature-length sequel and a TV series that both ruin what made it so good, but as its own single movie, it really is cult favorite material. Although, I wouldn't really say it's good enough for me to give it the Dirksen stamp of approval, so I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. Nah, I'm just kidding, guys. I actually do give it a 9 out of 10 with the Dirksen stamp of approval. Man, I got you for a second right there. But yeah, this is a movie that I look forward to seeing again at some point in time. Now we've gotten an actually good animated film covered, and now it's time to find out what the next review is on the Wheel of Animation. Before we make our spin, if you would like to send me some requests for the Wheel of Animation, you can either pledge to my Patreon at patreon.com/CalebDirksen, or post your request in the comments of the Caleb Reviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/CalebReviews. Alright, let's spin that wheel. Wheel of Animation, spin, spin, spin. Tell us the next review that I might win. And my next review is... Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. Alright, yes, I've been wanting to cover an Aardman movie for quite some time now. Like, especially one Wallace and Gromit related. Like, if they can pull it off with The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, then I bet they're gonna pull off with Vengeance Most Foul right here. So, next time on Caleb Reviews, join me as I'm going to be reviewing the 2024/2025 Aardman stop-motion claymation animated feature, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. This is Caleb, over and out.